Now, if she had been poisoned periodically over a long period of time with heavy metals, then there would have been an opportunity for those metals to work their way into bone. So you would get some bone from the long bones of the arms and legs and submit those to the toxicologist for appropriate preparation and analysis.
With Tammy Daybell, she was exhumed in December, and officials are saying that her autopsy is still ongoing. Does that sound right to you, that it would take this many months to complete the autopsy?
If the exhumation autopsy was done in December, then you're talking about 6 months approximately. I do not believe that there is any kind of test that has not yet been done. Any kind of test, the analysis of which requires more time. No, what they're telling you is standard verbal procedure for prosecutors, investigating police, and so on when it comes to news media, that they're not going to divulge information until they put everything together, the background information, and so on. There are no tests at all of any kind that require this kind of time. So you, in news media, you have to live with it. I understand your objective and the basis of intellectual impatience, but that's the way it works, and they'll release it when they're ready.
Dr. Wecht is, I'm sure, right on all that. Let's bring in Julie Grant, Court TV anchor, and Chanley Painter, Court TV legal correspondent, both joining us tonight. Julie, so they're not releasing it. They don't release a lot of information. And when we got that affidavit, it was huge to finally learn something. But there's been a lot of investigating going on by a lot of different agencies. And I'm wondering when that next arrest charge is going to come forward, if there's going to be murder charges that are connected, or if it's just going to be the kids and maybe Tammy Daybell if they have enough. How do you think that will potentially play out here based upon where we are in all of this?
Sure. I think kind of reading the tea leaves here, it seems like this is going to be big when these results are released, because why aren't they releasing them now? That was one thing I really wanted to make sure I asked Dr. Wecht about, because of all the thousands upon thousands of autopsies he's conducted and supervised and whatnot. For him to say, this should be done by now, essentially. There is no reason that this should be taking this long. There isn't, any other test he could possibly think of under the sun that probably hasn't been done. So it tells us that, all right, they're holding back those findings for some apparent reason. And the only thing we can, intelligently really infer at this point, that it is probably because of these death investigations and how they correlate to Cult Mom, Mr. Doomsday, the remains of those beautiful kids found in the backyard, Alex Cox's involvement, all of those brand new details we learned, Vinny, in that affidavit of probable cause pertaining to the Daybell property. So I think we just need to keep waiting, and intellectual impatience, as Dr. Wecht put it, we have to just keep on waiting, and eventually we will see those results revealed.
Yeah. And Chanley, this death is so suspicious, especially because of what happened just before she passed away. Someone took a shot at her, and she thinks it was a paintball. I know you're in the neighborhood talking with people about that. Do we know if it was an actual paintball shot that was taken at her, or if it was a real gun? Any more information on that part of it? Because that takes place just before she dies, right?
Just 10 days before she passes away in October, she calls the sheriff's office there in Fremont County, Idaho, and says that a masked man shot what she thought was a paintball gun at her from her driveway while she was trying to get in the front door of the home that we showed last week. And she believed that it wasn't loaded at the time that it was shot at, but it was such a weird incident there happening in Salem, Idaho, where the neighbors were shocked. They were on high alert, hunting the neighborhood to see where this masked man went to, and it was surprising to them, and really the start of a period there in that area of suspicious, strange activity. I spent more than a week in the East Idaho area, and the consensus of everyone I really talked to has this suspicion, real suspicion around Tammy Daybell's death. Even at the vigils we attended and the memorials, there were big pictures of Tammy Daybell along with JJ and Tylee, because the community feels that all of those deaths are related in some way. In fact, I spoke exclusively to a former friend of Chad Daybell and Tammy Daybell. Eric Smith, while I was in town there, he actually shed some light on Chad's behavior at Tammy's funeral, which was only 3 days after her death. Let's take a listen to that.
Concerning the details of her death, he told us what happened to her that morning. He told us that she had since been to visit him and is helping him set affairs in order, giving him direction on how to handle certain children and their future, and even where they should live, what schools they should go to. He told us all this in just the space of 2 minutes.
Wow.
And I was thinking, well, it's nice to know. You know, I'm glad he's had some comfort and peace through all this death that just took place 3 days ago or something. But in retrospect, it was all very calculated. He wanted to clear the air and let us all know exactly where things were.
Vinny, today I reached out to the Idaho Attorney General's office on any status update of releasing the results of Tammy Daybell's autopsy. We've been periodically checking in with them, and they are still not commenting, telling me today that it's a pending investigation because remember, the Idaho AG's office is investigating Tammy Daybell's death. Lori and Chad are the ones under investigation for conspiracy, attempted murder, and murder. That was announced a few months ago, which goes back to what Dr. Cyril Wecht told us. Julie and both I have spoken with him extensively about Tammy Daybell's autopsy, and he made an interesting prediction, Dr. Wecht did, that he believes because her body was exhumed 2 months later and they missed out on that initial autopsy when she passed away in October, that he wouldn't be surprised if her results were undetermined for cause and manner of death. So it'll be interesting to see when and if this Attorney General's office releases the results or if charges are forthcoming for Chad and Lori.
Yeah, and Julie, to get to those results, right? A pathologist talks about cause of death, but also manner of death. And manner can be accidental, suicide, natural causes, or homicide. How do you think they're going to do that? How would they be able to do that if it's 2 months later? What type of things are they looking for? How do they make that determination?
Great question, Vinny. That was something I spoke extensively with the doctor about. It's correlation is what's being done. Dr. Wecht really emphasized that we don't just look at pathological findings by themselves. They have to be correlated by all of the case evidence that's learned. And that goes in Tammy Daybell's death investigation. Same goes for J.J. Vallow's autopsy, Tylee Ryan's autopsy. In every case, you're going to correlate, something the doctor is very familiar with, having served as county coroner in Allegheny County in Pennsylvania, written a number of books, testified as an expert witness in countless trials. He definitely knows about correlation. Let's take a listen to a little bit of what he told me about that.
All of these findings have to be correlated with the clinical background. The clinical background in this case is, what do we know about the children? When and where were they last seen? You know, that is sometimes forgotten by people, whether they be the forensic scientist or the police officials or news media. You don't just deal with pathological findings by themselves. You correlate. So recently, for example, with Jeffrey Epstein, you correlate the fractures of the structures in his neck with other things like the cameras not working and the guards being asleep and so on. That's what I mean by clinical information. When were these kids last seen? By friends, by family, by schoolmates, in school, in church. Where were they? They weren't old enough to be out on their own. They weren't hiking in Montana or Yellowstone Park. They weren't shacked up at some motel and being fed by somebody. So that's all important. And this will all be used to zero in on the likely culprits here who were responsible for the children's death as well as the post-mortem concealment. It is a horrendous case, just really deplorable, despicable, and it's very sad. Even for a forensic pathologist like me, who's done 21,000 autopsies and reviewed, supervised, signed off on another 41,000, this would definitely fall within the upper 1% of cases of an atrocious, barbaric nature.
Correlation, it is truly key. And you can see why that explanation of the doctor, I think, is so important, that we can't just focus on what's going to be learned at autopsy, Vinny. And certainly cause and manner of death are always the goal, right? And we may or may not get there. Only time will tell. And of course, cause needs to be established first. You can't get to manner without establishing the cause. So cause, for example, could be a blow to the head, manner of death, homicide, that blow committed by somebody else. So we shall see with all of these autopsies what the results are, and how the correlation factors into the ultimate determination.
And correlating, everything in this case seems to correlate with Alex Cox, Chanley, right? We know he killed Charles Vallow. From what we looked at with what happened to the children, he is right there. He's there at the burial sites. He's at the apartment. You were in that neighborhood. He lived in that neighborhood where Lori Vallow lived. Did anyone remember him? Did anyone have anything to say about Alex Cox? Who was this guy?
Yeah, Alex Cox moved to Rexburg, Idaho, to the townhouse complex that we showed our viewers when I was there last week. And the complex, everyone was really nice, and even knowing that we were with the media, they were open and candid with what they knew. Now, Alex Cox didn't live in the same apartment number as Lori Vallow. He actually lived in a different row of townhouses a couple of rows down, so the neighbors really didn't see or hear much about Alex Cox, and they weren't living there that long. They moved there at the beginning of September 2019. That's the same month that the children go missing, of course, and then throughout October, November, we see appearances of Alex Cox at the storage facility, and of course now we know his phone pinging certain locations. But in the end of November, when Lori and Chad disappear, November 26th, they leave town. Cox isn't far after them. That weekend he leaves to marry Zulema Pastings in Las Vegas, November 29th, and then moves to Arizona. 2 weeks later, Vinny, he passes away suddenly. Now we know his autopsy was done in December. He died December 12th, a day after Tammy Daybell's body was exhumed for her autopsy. And now months later, last month in May, they finally released his autopsy results. Ultimately, the medical examiner saying that he died of natural causes. Now, the main cause of death was bilateral pulmonary thromboemboli, which in layman's terms was blood clots to the lungs. But still, being in Rexburg, people find his death super suspicious still.